I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet. For me, based here in Canberra, it's the Ngunnawal people, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And as I did last week in the rail freight strategy launch, I'd like to have a special shout out today to anyone joining us from Melbourne. We felt the tremor here in Canberra. Our thoughts are with you today. We hope that everything will work out fine and there's been no damage to your properties. In March this year, the ARA launched our report on the Australian rail supply chain, outlining the key challenges and opportunities facing the industry as we prepare for the future. With $155 billion of rail construction planned over the next 15 years, the report confirmed that action was needed to make the most of this once-in-a-generation opportunity. It made a range of recommendations to help ensure the rail supply chain in Australia doesn't just survive, but thrives, given its critical role in supporting economic recovery from the effects of COVID-19. Since then, we've been working with industry to develop a blueprint to put the report's recommendations into action. This has been an incredibly positive process and has involved extensive series of workshops and industry consultation to ensure the blueprint meets both our current and future needs. The process focused on identifying practical activities that the ARA could lead in collaboration with key stakeholders. We wanted to ensure that what we were putting in this report was something that we could specifically deliver and was measurable. Today, I'm pleased to launch the Rail Supply Chain Blueprint, which covers the key 8 areas of action, including procurement, standards, local content policy, innovation and technology, type approval, sustainability, skills, and export promotion. Each of these topics is intrinsically linked to each other. We cannot address one aspect successfully without addressing all of them together. Many of these issues are long-standing, very complex, and require significant cooperation across jurisdictions. But I am optimistic given the recognition of their critical importance by key stakeholders as we have consulted on the development of the blueprint. We've set ourselves ambitious timeframes to execute these activities, but this is due to its urgency and the critical crossroads that we've reached. Australia's rail supply chain is delivering a record rail investment pipeline and performing a critical role in Australia's economic recovery, whilst dealing with a fragmented local market with different regulatory, innovation and procurement policies, which is impeding our overall performance. Making the most of this opportunity will require collaboration within the industry and with our government partners. We recognise that some proposals outlined in the blueprint represent significant shifts in policy and processes that are currently in place. However, I'm encouraged by the positive in principle support we are receiving to explore many of these proposed activities. There is certainly a wind of change in a number of jurisdictions, and I had the pleasure of attending a meeting and a roundtable last week with the New South Wales government where a number of these issues were up for discussion. While we are launching the strategy today, I do want to acknowledge that a number of the initiatives within this blueprint have already commenced. As part of today's webinar, the ARA's General Manager for Supply Chain, Natalie Curry, will outline each of the blueprint's themes and briefly touch on the key activities. Following Nat's summary, I will introduce our industry panel to discuss the blueprint in more detail. Before I hand over to Nat, I do want to thank every ARA member and industry colleague that contributed to the development of this strategy. Your assistance has been greatly appreciated. Over to you, Nat.
Thanks so much, Caroline. So let me run through the context of each of these topics and the key initiatives. So first off, we've got procurement. And as we know, existing infrastructure and procurement processes are highly fragmented, with each state's planning and policy development happening in isolation from each other jurisdictions. So there's opportunities for procurement efficiencies through increased standardization and harmonization. And the activities in the blueprint really focus on advocating and progressing the adoption of the ARA's best practice procurement principles for rolling stock and signalling, as well as rail construction. So the ARA has actually established a national procurement working group, which is working through these principles with the state transport agencies. And the working group has actually initially identified two key areas to explore further. One is around the benefits of a national pre-qualification scheme, and the other is identifying some contract terms and conditions that could be standardised. So moving on to standards, we're seeing a growing recognition that more consistently applied standards and requirements provides the supply chain with opportunities for growth. So it builds economies of scale, it enables increased investment, and it realises production efficiencies. So the ARA applauds the Infrastructure and Transport Minister's recognition of the need to establish a National Rail Action Plan to provide a mechanism for increased collaboration. And the ARA is participating in the NRAP Harmonisation Committee, which is focused on initiatives to reduce unit costs in the rail industry while simultaneously stimulating domestic manufacturing and hence supporting suppliers. So to support these efforts, the ARA has provided feedback from its members as to where efficiencies can be achieved through the harmonisation, alignment and simplification or creation of specifications and standards that can be used by network owners and operators in procuring products and services. And ARA is also continuing to work with RISB in regard to those identified standards, many of which are part of RISB's work plan for review over the next 2 years. And as part of the blueprint activities, the ARA is also keen to explore the value in mandating some standards to support harmonised procurement, whilst at the same time seeking to better understand domain-specific requirements to support improved education to industry where these are necessary. In terms of local content, there's an increasing trend for state-based local content provisions. And in some instances, it's clearly stated that these in their local content policies. Other times it's a requirement of tenders, while for some tenders it's not necessarily clearly stated, but it's often factored into the tender assessment process. So while local content policies have explicit objectives for jobs growth and regional investment, these policies hinder the very local industry it's actually seeking to support. Because what we're seeing is the duplication of facilities across Australian states. It reduces the opportunity for increased investment and the benefits that come from consolidation and streamlined manufacturing and economies of scale, which obviously could in turn improve export competitiveness. So the activities of the blueprint really seek to clarify state and territories' position of the various elements of their local content policy and assess the implications on the supply chain and analyse whether the policy is actually meeting its stated objectives. The ARA with the industry is going to look to demonstrate and quantify how a national local content policy could better deliver state and territory objectives. Moving on to innovation and technology, for a supply chain to be sustainable, it really needs to continually innovate and be ready to adopt new processes or technologies. And the ARA believes that there's an improved partnership is required between industry and government operators to prioritise innovation. This is really going to enable us to reap greater benefits from the rail investments in terms of, long run cost and time savings, safety, capacity and reliability. So the blueprint activities are really currently focused on investigating the benefits and engaging industry support in establishing a national R&D body to provide that strategic direction and national alignment between governments and operators' technology roadmaps to drive collaboration in R&D and better support that commercialisation and adoption of new innovations. And the ARA is also planning initiatives such as the Meet the Innovator series to promote capability aligned with key areas of interest to clients. In terms of type approval, we know that type approval processes impact on innovation uptake. So currently, new technologies, products and processes, they must actually pass through each railway operator's specific approval processes prior to being rolled out, regardless of whether that technology or product or processes are being approved or applied elsewhere. So the type approval for one operator doesn't necessarily serve as a trust marker to another rail operator. And this adds a further hurdle to those that are developing innovative technology and proposing technology across different networks. So the rail blueprint activities is really about seeking a more harmonised approach to type approval processes applied through a cooperative agreement on a set standardised principles and approaches. And the activities will include investigating the benefit in establishing a process for mutual recognition of type approval compliance, certification against any common requirements, as well as the development of a national register. In regards to sustainability, it's really pleasing to see the growing recognition of sustainability in the circular economy in recent years. And ARA has a significant sustainability agenda, which was outlined in the launch of our sustainability strategy webinar a couple of weeks ago. But in terms of the specific blueprint activities relating to sustainability, the ARA will seek to continue to identify opportunities for sustainability within the supply chain and advocate for its green credentials. And the ARA will continue to support industry as they seek endorsements for Australian firsts in their sustainability submissions to the Infrastructure Sustainability Council. And we'll seek to clarify the consistency of government sustainability targets and policies to support the rail supply chain, particularly around recycled and recyclable products. Moving on to skills, as you're all currently aware, the Australian rail industry is currently facing a bit of a skills crisis. This is really driven by a combination of the surging demand with the wave of investment that's happening. We've got an ageing workforce, we've got a lack of sort of national training delivery and investment in human capital, and we've got this fragmentation of accreditation. But at the same time, we actually lack the profile of an industry to attract new entrants, as well as that competition from other industries who probably are doing this better. Pleasingly, skills is another area that's supported by the National Rail Action Plan via the Skills Committee. And the blueprint activities for skills will focus on supporting the establishment of national rail skills hubs, improving access and pathways to training and exploring improved training methods, developing a work in rail website, which will promote the benefits of a career in rail, the information around types of jobs, training requirements and job opportunities. And we're going to continue the development of the national competency matrices work. And we'll also continue the management of the National Rail Industry Worker Program to support industry with these competencies. And finally, export promotion. So the blueprint activities around export promotion will include raising the awareness of Australian rail capabilities to support opportunities for local firms to engage in global supply chains via like virtual trade missions or international trade delegations. However, our initial steps will really be to focus on better understanding suppliers' export aspirations and their target markets. But that brings me to the end of my summary. Thanks, Caroline.
Thank you, Nat. We'll now move on and I will invite our panelists to join me on the screen. There we go. Wonderful, we have everyone with us. I'm very fortunate today to be joined by a wonderful panel. First of all, we have Ben Filand, who's the Head of Rolling Stock Development Network Integration for Victoria's Department of Transport. Ben oversees the Victorian Government's huge train and tram procurement program, totalling over $7.5 billion of rolling stock and supporting infrastructure investment. Sarah Dearman is the Regional Vice President, Freight Services Asia Pacific at Wabtec Corporation. Sarah ensures Wabtec freight service customers can achieve optimal locomotive reliability, asset utilisation and operational efficiencies. And Sarah joins us with over 20 years experience in the industry. Julian Sharp is the Project Director at CPB Contractors and also an ARA board member. He's previously been Deputy Project Director of the $1.4 billion line-wide project as part of Sydney Metro City and Southwest project in Sydney. And we're also joined by Michael McLellan, Managing Director of Knorr-Bremse Australia, also an ARA board member and Chair of the Rail Industry Group. Michael leads his organisation's mission to drive safe mobility across rail and commercial vehicles. He's also got capabilities in business development and developing global relationships. So thank you very much. Just a reminder before we begin the questions that you can submit questions in the chat box to the right of your screen anytime during the discussion. I do encourage you to drop those in because there's a lot to talk about. So first of all, Ben, I just wanted to talk about procurement. There's been a concerted effort by jurisdictions to review and reform procurement frameworks over the past few years. Do you think there's a growing acknowledgement by governments of the importance of considering how different jurisdiction investment pipelines and procurement approaches affect the industry?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, it's a pretty interesting time. I don't think there's been as much work going on currently, in terms of in the field, as well as procurement and future investment. So we've got a number of projects across our big building in Victoria, which effectively all held up waiting on key skills, key resources, both with interstate and in New Zealand. We're actually all fighting for the same resource to finish our jobs. So the only way we can really move forward is to work together to sort of understand who's procuring what when. Now, it's very difficult when we're all got our own different political cycles and separate funding, but the reality is we can't deliver our projects if we haven't got the resources and the key suppliers that we need to do them. So we are doing a lot of work with other, I'm doing a lot of work with my peers in other states to try and make sure that we're aware what each other's doing to the extent that we can be, just so that we sort of know when people are in the market, where they're sort of where they're up to with their programs, to try and do what we can to shift ours to fit where it makes sense. But there's no real quick and easy answer here. It just really requires more work to make sure we're all communicating with each other and being aware.
Absolutely. Julian, given the wave of investment in rail, how urgent do you think the need is for further reforms in the area of procurement?
Look, I think it's very urgent that we need to see improvements across all aspects of the procurement cycle. From a rail contractors group perspective, and we're doing a lot of work with in this area, it is about trying to reduce cost, making the procurement process quicker. And that cost is also not just for the contractors, but also the clients. So it's a smoother process. Also, making that procurement process similar across each of the jurisdictions so that we can move those resources around more easily so they know what to expect as part of that process. And look, there's an ongoing conversation. I think we recognise that best practice, some areas do it well, some areas need improvement. I think if we can bring all that best practice together, including from what's done abroad, and learn from those lessons, I think we can get a far more efficient process, understand how we can meet that, so that pipeline of work, the requirements to build infrastructure, which we know is huge and only getting bigger, and then obviously get an overall better outcome for the country.
Absolutely. Sarah, pre-qualification is something that's being discussed and identified as an area where there'd be significant benefits from a nationally consistent approach. What efficiency improvements would you expect from a national pre-qual scheme?
Look, I think it just goes to Julian's point where we're kind of facing a tidal wave of rail projects coming our way here in Australia over the next 10 years. So anything at all we can do to streamline the procurement process has to be a good thing. If I think about my own experience, and I'm sure it's not too dissimilar to many, but so many suppliers are scrambling at the last minute for things like insurance certificates, statements of finance, policies. But if this could all be provided up front and stored in, a portal or something like that, then that gives clients the opportunity to shortlist and potentially invite tenders to tender. But it also gives suppliers, less work in terms of regurgitating the same information, changing formats time and time again. So, look, I think pre-qualification definitely is required in order to streamline the procurement process.
Absolutely. Nat, just to draw on you, obviously, internally and when we're talking to members, procurement is front and center of the work that we're doing. And I know that you've already started on a number of items in this area. Do you want to just expand on what you're doing in the procurement space as part of the blueprint?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a number of these things sort of fall under procurement when we talk about pre-qualification and type approval. And I think it's important to address all of them together. Having this national working group with each of the state agencies, I think shows a real commitment by the jurisdictions acknowledging the need for collaboration in this space. So that's just wonderful. And they're all really keen to explore the benefits of each of these new proposed systems. And it's certainly a recognition that there's significant, processes and frameworks that would be having to be changed internally by governments of what we're proposing. But I think that there's engagement, which is great. And so specifically around exploring national pre-qualification, what does that look like? Can we get standardized a process? And it's not necessarily agreeing to every single, certificate to be the same for every tender. It's about having, whether it's, exploring the benefits of a portal. Can we all just implement our information once and once only, and only update when, it requires it, and those that need it, the clients are obtaining the information from that portal when they need it as well. And so it just streamlines that. I think there's lots of ways we can look at pre-qualification and a national approach in this. And same goes for type approval. Duplicating is just unnecessary. So it's where we can get some harmonisation. We're trying to explore that in really practical ways. Yeah,
absolutely. Ben, over to you. The next issue is standards, because standards keeps coming up time and time again. The joys of federation. You're co-chairing the National Rail Action Plan Harmonisation Committee, which is focused on identifying the benefits of a more harmonised approach to common standards and components for rolling stock. Do you anticipate this research will justify a more national approach? And what can you share with us about the work of that group?
Yeah, thanks, Carol. So the work's been going for a number of years now, and effectively we've got RISB as a key partner producing the standards for us. I think we've released 3 so far. There's another 3 about to be released, and we've got a 3-year program to get a number of more standards released. And what it's not about cracking new standards just to the point of having a national protective role. It's really identifying where the areas that make sense. We have got some unique things. We have some pretty high temperatures in Australia, some fairly unique conditions. What that means is actually we don't have a HVAC standard in Australia that covers our range of conditions. The European standard maxes out at a certain temperature. The US is a bit different. So we always get into this interpretation of what a European standard is for Australia. We're trying to make up our own one that actually uses the European standard, but then makes it properly suitable for us. So we don't have different standards being approached by different jurisdictions in Australia, making their own interpretation. Hopefully that makes it easier for a supplier then to make one unit for the whole of Australia, whole Australia, New Zealand. So ideally it's about trying to get the componentry and equipment the same. We know that the gauges are different. We know that we have different widths, lengths, heights, all that sort of stuff of trains. So it's probably unlikely we'll be able to have exactly the same train or tram. We have got really close arrangements between Queensland and Western Australia, but still between 700 and 7,000 changes for those products. So what we're trying to do is get to the bits that are common, the bits that have a long-term need, the bits that are replaced, that are refreshed, that are overhauled through spare parts, get those as standard as we can. So hopefully they're shared across the country. Hopefully we have a much bigger volume. We can actually get some better investment for the manufacturing of those. We don't want plants in every state. We sort of, how can we share and work out where's the best place to have the centre of expertise in bogies, wherever it might be. And we can actually get some volume up and we get some consistency. And what we're finding when we do this work, when we start calculating across the country, we start getting a volume that actually makes sense and makes things cheaper than they are to import.
Yeah.
So it actually does work, but only works if we all get together. Now, the problem here is it's going to take many years. It's taken us 3 years to get 3 out. Once we get the standards out, we've then got to get them into a specification, into a procurement approach, get them out. So it's going to take probably 10 years for us to really see some benefit. But if we don't start somewhere, we'll never get there. So effectively, that's the intent of the requirement. Everyone's really keen, really eager. We've got a lot of good support from other jurisdictions and industry. Everyone wants the answers next year and the results straight away. So we are trying to calculate what we think the benefit would be or would have been if we had this in place earlier from economic analysis to try and validate, because a lot of this is about pitching to federal government and trying to make sure it's recognised across the country. So there's actual benefit recognised, that then hopefully there'll be some funding as well from our federal counterparts to support some of this activity and procurement going forward.
Absolutely. The ARA is a really strong advocate for the work that the NTC is doing under the National Rail Action Plan. So it's wonderful to see this continuing. Michael, I mentioned earlier the interrelated nature of many of these issues. Even with a standardised approach to standards applications and components, how do jurisdictions' current local content policy impact these efforts?
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. I'm very encouraged to hear what Ben just said, actually, about local content policy and standards. It sounds very promising, and probably heads towards some of the things I would comment on. But, you know, from our perspective, local content policies has some really positive effects. Obviously, it helps maintain capabilities in Australia, of course, supports local manufacturing, you know, ensures we develop a properly trained workforce, which we need for the duration of and maintenance of the projects as well. However, as Ben said, we need some sort of nationally coordinated approach to local content policy. Would certainly further help. I mean, from a private company perspective, you know, to invest capital in a manufacturing site or doing something, you need reasonable aggregated volumes, and you need a good horizon of work coming through, and then you can justify that capital. And then if the problem we've got at the moment is obviously we need to avoid manufacturing in 3 or 4 different locations for the same component. Ben spoke about HVAC, for instance. Our company is manufacturing in 3 locations, HVAC for rail, which is kind of crazy because it doesn't allow us to invest properly in you know, advanced manufacturing techniques, you know, jigs, tooling, basic robotics, the sort of thing that a manufacturer would do to become efficient, and create an efficient industry that gives value for money to government, but also gives the opportunity for even some export opportunities. And there is opportunities there. For instance, on our HVAC market, we're exporting to Bangladesh at the moment, but we're also exporting our engineering to different parts of the world. So, you know, sensible, strong local content policy where we aggregate volumes and we have a good, strong pipeline going forward would really help. And we've got to avoid this issue of setting up to manufacture for one series or one contract and then having an interruption before we go to the extension project and things like that. But I think, you know, the sense of it I get is we're really getting some great cooperation now with NRAP and the like between the rail industry and the various states, which I think is really promising.
It's interesting though, I mean, you know, political imperative within individual states and the idea that I will force a business to set up a business here in our state so that it could be part of the local content. But all that is doing is really blowing out a lot of the costs on these projects. So
I might just add, Caroline, it's not a sustainable option, is it?
No, not if we want the Australian market to be an export market, or at least for those businesses who want to have that opportunity. Certainly not. But the joys of politics, well, you know, I think that's probably a bigger issue that we need to argue. Certainly, you know, you can see where it's been very effective in somewhere like Victoria, but now that a lot of these businesses are in Victoria, it does seem strange if they win contracts to then have to set up things in other states. But
well, the other thing is for local businesses, say in Victoria, who are already set up in Victoria, if they can't bid somewhere else, especially small and medium-sized businesses who only have one site, it becomes a real problem, even for the site that that business is operating in, say in Melbourne. You know, they want to get the volume in Perth or Brisbane as well. Yeah.
I wasn't going to name and shame other states, but yes, Michael.
Well, we're all to blame.
Yes.
No naming and shaming WA.
No.
Okay.
Sarah, in your view, how important do you think this national local content policy would be, specifically around employment and investment in terms of local rail suppliers?
Yeah, look, I think Ben and Michael have really hit the nail on the head. I see it from 2 sides of the coin. I mean, every customer wants security of supply. They want a quality product on time. But the other big factor is it has to be at the most competitive price. So we're always trying to balance that equation. And if you think through the last 18 months, Caroline, you know, we've had the COVID pandemic, we've had Suez canals get blocked. We're in a hyperinflation market where shipping times, for example, China to the US, which would normally be 8 weeks, is now today 16 weeks. So the global supply chain, you could say, is almost kind of out of control. And local procurement is a very good strategy to help mitigate some of those risks that we're seeing outside of the country. So, you know, to Michael's point, it does drive growth, but Ben rightly said, we have to have volume. If I look at my experience just with the GE Transportation and Webtech merger, the biggest thing that we've been looking at as a combined organisation, and Favourly included, is how do we maximise the production through our existing facilities? How do we increase that throughput, reduce our overhead costs, and just become more productive? So, you know, I think it really is all about understanding that demand going into the future. And, you know, I've seen some great examples of that just recently with big customers here in the West, as well as local government, suppliers, OEMs, all working together to understand that projected demand ahead of us, and you know, where does it make sense to set a facility up? And if there's a facility already in Northern Territory or somewhere like that, it certainly doesn't make sense to duplicate facilities, because it's not sustainable, it's not cost effective. So
yeah, and it's certainly something that I can see is impacting our skills. You know, you're not going to invest in staff, invest in their education, and you're not going to be attractive to other people coming into the sector if we don't have that continuity of supply. And certainly I've had a lot of feedback in recent weeks about the dramatic increase in shipping costs and what that's meaning for contracts more broadly. Just a reminder to anyone who is watching, please do jump in with the Q&A. You're a very quiet lot. We haven't had a single question come through. So please do send them through. Just wanted to talk now about innovation and technology. Obviously, the ARA did another major piece on this last year as well. Moving to you, Ben, there is a perception of a risk-averse culture of governments and operators when it comes to applying new technology. Someone joked to me today that no one's going to try any new innovation until they've seen it in place in 3 different organisations, which kind of negates it being innovative in the first place. Do you think that type of assessment is fair? And do you think transport agencies and operators do more, in fact, to support that innovation?
It's an interesting topic. I mean, I guess in previous background, I was always trying to sell innovative things to try and get a market edge, and can understand why customers didn't jump at these amazing ideas I had. And, I think reality is when you're on the other side and you've actually got to deliver something and it's got to be there for 30 years, and you've got to make sure it's not going to fail, and you've got to be confident it's going to work. So you get to this very you know, time-bound issue where you have to make sure whatever you're about to procure is actually going to work, and you've got the confidence level that while you're still keen on innovation and change, something that's going to make a difference, that it's going to work. And if you're not convinced it's going to work, are you going to put your name behind it? And as a minister, going to be embarrassed if it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of the rollout of technology changes is delayed. It takes time. So really, you're sort of watching, you're sort of really close to the front watching everybody else, but you're just a bit nervous about dipping your toe in the water until someone else has taken that first plunge and gone through the issues. So, you know, for us as customers, as government, I guess we're really looking at, do people really understand the challenges that we've got, and how does their change or innovation help us? If I talk about sustainability and emissions, if we look at, you know, in Melbourne, our tram and train network use the most power, those two combined, of anything in the state. And while we've done a great job to offset that and, you know, buy power from a solar farm, we're still chewing up more power than anyone else in the state. So having a lighter weight vehicle that uses less energy or regenerates more is a real dollar saver for us.
It's interesting. Sorry, Michael, yeah?
Sorry, Carolyn, I was just going to say, I see Ben's problem from the other side of the fence, where, you know, there's a high risk in taking on new technology innovations, particularly on large new projects where there's a 30-year life. I actually think we've got a lot of old rolling stock in the country. There's an opportunity in many cases to trial new technology on modernising new rolling stock. You know, Ben, you've got a zillion old trams in Melbourne, for instance, where new technology could be trialled in a fairly contained environment to get some confidence to roll out into a larger project. because suppliers are in the same boat. We're a little reluctant to roll out new technology if the penalties for doing so, if it doesn't work very well, are so high. So you know, I think there's an opportunity to try to doing you know, advocating technology in very large projects is to do some trial work collaboratively between the supply chain and government. Yeah.
Definitely, we're really keen on that. Any opportunity we get to try and look at that, but it's just we've got to look at what will that change. What will the benefit be of that change?
Yeah, and it's interesting. We've now had a flurry of comments come through, which is fantastic to see. But there's a great point here that someone's raised about attracting that innovation investment from international companies into the country because of our fragmentation and local content and lack of economy of scale. So the comment was, we're missing out on that international investment in innovation. But the point that I wanted to pose to all of you was, this person has said, you know, sustainability is the new thing. We need to focus on sustainability as an industry. But for a lot of businesses who want to include, you know, recycled products, new things, etc., it's hard for them to go through a process, get type approval, the cost, the investment, etc. I mean, how can we, you know, this isn't just about investment specifically, but just in terms of the sustainability place, how do we get more sustainable parts of our industry moving with the current structure? Anyone want to jump in on that one?
I guess yeah, it's interesting being government. You have lots of different parts of government say different things, and you know, in my experience in Victoria, we've got obviously our environmental side of our government making very clear policy decisions on, you know, zero emissions going forward, 2050 zero emissions in public transport, and from 25 all buses being zero emissions. So there's a lot of policy stuff that's been released that says this is what we're doing. As obviously in a role in transport, trying to buy equipment to keep things moving, you go, well, hang on, I can't buy that at the moment. So we're sort of getting challenged as well by our own policy. But from our point of view, it's more looking at what's realistic, what can we buy, and what's the cost of it to run over the life. And if it stacks up because it saves money, no brainer. We've got a good business case. We can get Treasury across the line. If it's just sustainability for sustainability's sake, we'll still struggle. We're still got to go through approval process. So it's really got to, unfortunately, tick quite a few boxes to get us there. But I think, you know, using that policy context to sort of tell the market this is the direction we're heading and we want to head, but we've also got to make sure things stack up. So it's a tough challenge. I don't know if there's any real quick, clear answers there, but it's I guess all we can really do is say what our direction is and what our vision is. And then try and help with suppliers to understand that and see what offerings come back to try and meet those policy positions.
So, Sarah, I was actually going to throw to you because obviously Wabtec's had a very exciting announcement in the past week. Do you want to talk about sustainability and energy and emissions in the supply chain?
Yeah, and look, maybe just following on from that last point, I think there's elements of you know, this industry, particularly in the private industry, that are able to act really agile, be quick. And the great example, as Caroline's just alluded to, is Roy Hill will be the first mining customer globally to purchase the first freight battery electric locomotive. So that's going to be here in Australia, 2023. It's a huge step change for this region and aligns with you know, everything we've been talking about in terms of sustainability. But going back to your question, Caroline, you know, I think there's so much we can do right up front in that procurement process. You know, how do we ensure that sustainability in the supply chain, in the project that you're delivering perhaps, is actually weighted and valued by the client? So there's so many things in which can be done, whether it's the local policy, local procurement, manufacturing, you know, the list goes on, the technology, the people you'll be using, but we have to ensure that this is part of the procurement process. It's weighted and it's valued in the selection process. So I think we've got to start turning some of the rhetoric that we all read about into reality. And I think Broy Hill's done that. So good on them. We look forward to delivering that locomotive.
We're excited to see it.
We all are.
Moving on to type approval, Julian, this is something that comes up with members a lot, the type approval chestnut. How much do you think that's limiting the adoption of innovation, and what do you think we need to do to solve this issue?
Look, you're right, type approval has been a bugbear of the industry, and I always hark back to Danny's comment about railways being glacial in relation to change. Maybe that's speeding up slightly, but that could be climate change. I don't know. But look, there's a lot we need to do in this space, and you know, within the rail contractors group, we have started to look at this to understand what the differences are across the country, because there are significant differences for similar types of product. Just within the construction industry, the challenge we have with regards new products is the time that it takes to deliver projects, which is usually quite short. So, you know, the time it takes to actually get these approved when you may be putting it into a tender and not knowing whether it will be approved is obviously a risk that a lot of times you won't necessarily take. I've been involved in a number of jobs over the last few years where clients, whether it be LXRP, Sydney Metro and soon to be ARTC, I think do understand the importance of innovation and looking at how that can be driven through key result areas or KPIs so that you get a bit of a share of that benefit, and I think that does drive good behaviours. But I think it's also making sure that across the country we've got similar rules. We don't then have to go through numerous tests and items like that. I look at sleepers. Geopolymer, same size sleeper, we should just be using it everywhere. Plastic sleepers is a big thing we're going through, and yes, maybe not ideal for heavy haul, but for lighter railways, I think that's something we've just got to go with. We are obviously, they're being used in Melbourne, they're used on Heritage Railway in a number of areas, and I think, the challenge we've got there is only one supplier in the country. So, then it comes down to a volume issue and ultimately the price point, noting that they are unfortunately more expensive than timber, but not necessarily as concrete. So a lot of challenges there. But I think this working group that we're part of, with what Michael's team are doing, I think is starting to understand the problem. I think if people understand what the problem is and the real benefits, then I think there's definitely the ability to do more. It's linked to standards a little bit as well, rather than having a defined standard, let's have a performance spec maybe where enables us as contractors. I look at formation, there's a comment there around geogrids for permanent way, but I think there's a lot more work we could do in relation to formation design. We're about to embark now on inland rail on some of the greenfield sites. What can we really do in that space to provide the ability not to be digging up everything all the time, using that material more easily and still providing the same specification requirements for heavy haul. It's a complex topic, but we are making some steps, but we've got a long way to go still, I think.
Absolutely. There's someone's made an interesting comment here about how the great work of iTrace with the unique product identification could actually be supported by a type approval national register, and keen to see that as a reality. Nat, I know, has gone back and indicated keen to investigate that further. So certainly opportunities there. Just picking up, there are two topics that have come up in a variety of different questions. One is on, I know we'll move away from the set questions for a moment, but one is around standards. And, some people have alluded to mandating of some standards because, this is the other thing in rail. I come from big R regulator in the aviation industry where it's you will do X and you do X and then everyone knows that and you build all your widgets to comply with X. In the rail industry, it's more do what you want to do within the parameters of what you can do, which is fantastic, particularly when you don't want to have to significantly invest to meet one standard. But obviously it becomes a challenge for the supply chain. So anyone want to jump in on this, lovely little one? I know it's always, at the side of the room.
Well, I'll jump in, Caroline. From I guess from Knorr-Bremse perspective or from the supplier perspective, we probably err away from having standards mandated. A lot of the reason for that is we do a lot of work worldwide every year on developing research and technology and new products and things like that, and mandating standards is a bit of a wet blanket often over those sort of product developments. Now, that may be different from an infrastructure or a below rail perspective or signalling and things like that. But from a rolling stock subsystem point of view, mandating standards can have a real wet blanket on product development. Yeah.
I kind of back Michael up on that. I mean, obviously, Webtech's predominantly US centric, and that's where we've got 20-odd thousand locomotives running around. So a lot of the standards are from the American Association of Railroads, and that's what's deployed here. But yeah, we absolutely do need that flexibility. I don't think it can be European or American, but yeah, we need the flexibility so that we can leverage all the technology that's been developed globally.
Yeah, and I will take this opportunity to do a shout out to RISB, because obviously they do wonderful work on behalf of industry in this standard space as well. Another question or another issue that's been raised here by a couple of people talking about that innovation discussion is looking at defence and their use of an innovation hub, which is funded by companies as well as, I believe, government, and that there are grants given out. Nat, you're nodding. You're obviously across this as well. Do you want to talk to that as an issue? It's just been raised as a question as to, well, why aren't we looking at that as a mechanism?
No, I think it's a good point in terms of an example, but I think it's unfair example perhaps compared to rail, because there's only one purchaser of defence equipment, so it's pretty easy to get engagement from your one client. Yeah. And that's the challenge we have in rail, is when we have lots of clients. But it is about having clarity, and it is about bringing the clients and the suppliers together so that there's clear signals for the market in terms of where to invest. And at the moment, we don't even necessarily have long-term visibility of, of jurisdictions, I guess, technology roadmaps or where they're keen to invest. And certainly our upcoming series in terms of Meet the Buyer, there's some of the specific questions I've asked for the buyers to share. Where are you focusing on in the future? Tell the industry and the supply chain where you're keen to head. Is there some sustainability issues? Is it about social procurement? Just to provide that clarity and transparency to the industry to know where to engage. But I think the more sharing, the more collaboration we can do in this space, the better, recognising the whole aspects of around IP and funding. So, but I think sharing and having a network where that information and ideas are shared in is great.
Absolutely, and that's a great opportunity to give a plug for our Meet the Buyer sessions, which are coming up next month. I think we have 8 already locked in, so I do encourage you to look out for those because they were incredibly popular last year. Julian or Michael, did you want to add anything on that?
Look, I just wanted to say, I think it's a good question, because it came out of the R&D white paper where it said we need some sort of nationally coordinated R&D approach to the rail industry, and we do need to understand that supply chain needs to understand what are the problems operators are trying to solve, and conversely the operators need to understand what are the emerging technologies that are coming out of the supply chain as well that they may be able to use. So we do need some national coordination. I think you could use an example, which is the Ukraine example in the UK, where they have a nationally coordinated rail research group, which has centres of competencies, which helps suppliers connect with research institutions and the like. And importantly, it's very well funded. So the budget for Ukraine, I think, is around about £100 million, $200 million, and the UK is about 3 times our size. So if the budget was 70 million Australian dollars to support technology development in Australian rail, it would be fantastic. And I'm not suggesting that the government pays for everything, and we need some industry involvement and some supplier involvement, but I think we need a really clear pathway for the problems we're trying to solve and how to engage operators with the supply chain, and how we can even get some support from government to do some of that cutting edge research, or even just application stuff like Ben talked about earlier with high temperatures and, you know, high axle loads and Pilbara and things like that, areas where we have good competitive advantage already.
It's an interesting issue that Nat had picked up as well. Unfortunately, COVID has thrown some of our event plans this year into complete disarray. But we did actually want to do Meet the Innovators section as well, which was at the moment we have major organisations and supply chain people engaging in that. But we will still look at an opportunity. So if people do have technology or innovation that they want to get ahead of some of these major purchases, that we can facilitate that. So if you would want to be involved in something like that, please contact Nat. Now, a lot of these issues that we've talked about, I have full faith in Nat and Cindy, and I have full faith they're going to solve a lot of these issues. But the big overarching issue that remains a challenge is skills and trying to get enough people into the industry. Michael, I'll start with you. How important do you think a collaborative approach is to address the skills challenge, and what do you see as the first steps?
Sorry, unmute. Yeah, no, the collaboration is most important. And I think the most important first step that's already been taken is to keep the industry and government in lockstep in terms of skills development has been the National Rail Skills Hub, which has been announced and is being supported by the various ministers of each state. And I know Ben's been involved with that as well, and you, Caroline. And
yeah.
I think that's a really positive development. I think we've got to work together between government and industry to make sure we've got the right training, training programs, the right, standardization of requirements, etc. But I think the second important step really falls on our shoulders as an industry and in terms of the supply chain, is really to advertise how good a place rail is to work. It's really important. We need to attract people to rail, and it's the usual thing. When people come and work in this space, they enjoy it, and they also, if I talk to the younger people in my company, they also enjoy the fact that they're involved in an industry which has a really positive outward-facing culture in terms of energy efficiency and carbon and those sorts of things. But I think there's a lot of work to be done in terms of attracting younger people, and also diversity is a clear weakness in this industry. Not shown on this panel right now, but if you surveyed the industry, we are way heavily older workforce, male-dominated environment.
Julian, how important do you think this national approach would be in terms of competencies, particularly across the contractor part of the business?
Look, I think it's well known that that competency difference or requirements for operators and owners is proving a real challenge across the industry. Okay, COVID's causing a challenge of moving people between states, but a lot of work's being done, especially with those critical resources such as signaling, power, overheads, etc., where we would expect, yes, each operator has different sort of local rules, but generally signaling is based on electronics, and if we can get that sort of national competency baseline, which we're almost there with, or very close to, aligned by everybody, then the ability for a signaling engineer or technician or commissioning engineer to move between states with national companies would be far easier. I think also, and it's a little bit linked about making railways a place where people want to work. If you want to be a signaling engineer, but you decide to move between states, you may have to retrain and do lots more courses that you think, why am I doing this? Because they already know about it. So I think, what NATS is doing with the RCG and other groups in relation to getting to a position is great. We're now looking at electrical and power, again, similar sort of technologies around the country. Electrons don't change when they cross borders. So we just need to make sure there's consistency so that we can then move these critical resources around, so we don't have to have one big bank of people in each state. Noting that possessions and occupations are generally different. it allows contractors and specialists to provide services more easily on those projects and get those works done more quickly. That I think, you know, has been the challenge. We are making significant progress. You know, there's more to do. I think we just need everybody ultimately to understand the benefit and come to the party, and then be reasonable about what extra little things they might need for their own rules. That for me is a key challenge which we are overcoming. But again, I think there's probably a bit more work to do.
Absolutely. We just have enough time now. I thought it'd be great to throw to each of our panelists with your final thoughts or comments. Nat, anything from you?
No, I just think underpinning everything is about harmonisation. So any collaboration or cooperative effort through, you know, partnership between industry, government and clients, I guess, the operators and the transport agencies is what is going to make the step change that we need. Yeah.
Ben, final comment?
I just want to applaud the ARA really for this initiative. It's, you know, probably a long time coming. Lots of input and lots of discussions with you know, all states, operators, suppliers, members. So a really good piece of work, and I think we've just got to keep it going and make sure we're all keep the conversation going. And if anyone's got ideas, suggestions of what we can do to solve some of our problems, we're all ears. So yeah, thanks a lot for the time.
Thanks, Ben. Sarah?
Oh, look, I think echoing Ben's comments, I think it's great that this has been released. I feel that, you know, the work is really ahead of us, but, you know, we've got to start somewhere. And what I really like about a number of the action plans is that they're forming the ARA is forming working committees, which will be, you know, collaborative, have clients, suppliers, etc., all involved. So I think we're definitely on a good path. So well done.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. Michael?
A lot of the stuff we've been talking about goes to the problems of federation, actually. So, you know, you talk about R&D or local content and skills and things like that. It requires, as Ben said, for all of us to work together. And actually, for the first time in a long time over the last year or so, there's the green shoots of cooperation across the states and between the rail industry. So I'm really encouraged. It's a long road, to hoe for sure. There's a lot of work to be done, and we need these working committees to do that. But I think everyone's got the right outlook. So I'm thoroughly encouraged.
Wonderful. Julian, last word.
Yeah, look, I think the key for me is we understand what the problems are, identify the action plans to deliver that. We have people who can see the benefit of getting involved. Yes, results are obviously baby steps, but they'll all add up to ultimately the best outcome we can achieve for the country. So I think it's, you know, and everybody within the ARA is putting together, which is a great thing about it. You know, it's not just contractors, suppliers, everybody together. So it's a journey we all need to take, and we're all committed to it.
Wonderful. One thing that excites me, just as a final point, is the ARA has been working really closely with Roads Australia, Consult Australia and the Contractors Association, because a lot of our industries have very similar issues across the supply chain in terms of procurement. So I'm hopeful that a coalition of this type of group will lead to some better outcomes as well, and we greatly appreciate their assistance on issues in the rail sector. Well, that brings today's webinar to an end. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for your contribution today. It's greatly appreciated. You will find a copy of the Rail Supply Chain Blueprint on the ARA website. For anyone who would like to get involved in any of the actions, Natalie is your woman, and she would be more than happy to talk to you about ways that you can get involved in supporting the ARA's work on the blueprint. Also of note, thank you to all of you for participating today, and particularly those of you who engaged in the Q&A. A short feedback survey will be circulated, which I encourage you to complete. We want to make sure that we make these events what you need. If you haven't already, please sign up for our next webinar on Wednesday, the 29th of September, which is actually on rail skills for the future. On behalf of the ARA, thank you for joining us today. Stay safe until we see you next time. Thank you for joining us, and have a lovely afternoon. Thank you.